Have Bill Norton with the strategies for network operators. And as Bill is setting up, please remember to send your peering introductions as we continue. The slide comes up, there it is, at some point. Send that information because we'll be doing this after the coffee break before we close at the end of the day.
There we go. So I guess I can just use this microphone. You guys already heard my jokes. I'll tell you one last story, though. I gave a talk in Japan, and again, there were the people in the back of the room translating what I said in English into Japanese. Everyone in the room is wearing headphones, and so I told, I think I told the cell phone joke. And at the end, there was a little bit of a delay, and then everyone in the room laughed and laughed. And I thought, okay, my joke worked. A friend of mine that's Japanese, though, told me what the translator actually said was, the speaker just told an amusing anecdote. It would now be polite for you to laugh. So I can't get a break with my jokes, apparently. So what I'd like to share with you in this section is actually from a lot of the work that I've done here across Africa. As I mentioned this morning, I do these two-day peering workshops where I come in and a group, an executive team or network architecture team, we walk through the material. And it's almost literally walking through the material in the book, but then applying it to the client. And what I've noticed in Africa is we always have the same discussion. Every ISP that we've done this workshop with, we have the exact same discussion. These same questions come up. What should our peering policy be when we expand into this particular country? Should we build into Europe? Because, gosh, transit is really expensive here in Africa. I'm paying $400 per meg, and Europe looks awfully attractive at $2 or $3 a meg, right? And the other question is, how should we blend our strategy for peering along with our strategy for transit purchasing and transit sales? And then, of course, the most common question is, how do we force the incumbent to peer with us, right? So what I want to share with you is a model. I've not shared this material in any other form, so it's going to be a little bit rough, perhaps, but this is the model that comes up in each one of these consulting interactions. This is what I call now the international peering model. And if I could just kind of walk you through, just like with a peering simulation game, we need to create a bunch of simplifying assumptions so we can discuss the core of the matter. So along the left-hand side, I'm enumerating a bunch of simplifying assumptions. And the idea then is, well, you can later go back and say, well, that simplifying assumption is not correct, and then make adjustments as you see fit. But to facilitate an easy discussion about international peering deployment, let's start out with the assumption that we have 3 internet regions. And when I say internet region, you can think country. And we have ISP-A that's decided to build into each of these 3 countries. And that box with an A in it, consider that to be the router, that is the presence within that country. And then between those routers, this ISP has transport. This might be an STM1 between the routers. And the cost of that transport is lowercase t per megabit per second. And we're going to assume in this model that the price that this ISP-A can charge for transit in any region is $T per megabit per second. Okay? So he gets capital T $ per megabit per second in transit revenue, if he has to go between regions, he's going to pay $T per megabit per second. And we're going to make a further simplifying assumption that all customers are the same. They're either all eyeball heavy, which means all traffic is coming from them and going up, or they're all content, which means all traffic is going up and out. Okay? So the customers in this model are shown as these inverted triangles. And I've numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9. These are the customers, the guys who are paying ISP-A for access to the global internet transit. And you can tell who's getting paid by where the $sign is. I have the $sign next to the guy who's getting paid. Now, on the right-hand side, you see the peers shown as circles. And I labeled the peers BCD, EFG, and HIJ with a P on the line, indicating that this is a peering interconnect. And recall that peering is defined as a reciprocal exchange of access to each other's customers. Not access to the global internet, but access to each other's customers. Does that make sense? Okay, so given this simplified model, I'm going to assert that there are only 3 types of traffic in the world. There's customer-to-customer traffic. There's customer-to-peers customer traffic. And then there's traffic to the rest of the internet. And this is important because if you look at that first type of traffic, traffic between customers of ISP-A, we see it shown down here on the bottom as between traffic that's coming from customer 9 going through A's router to customer 8. Okay, that's customer-to-customer traffic. And the other variation is when the traffic from, say, customer 6 goes to a router and across a transport circuit down to a South African customer number 7. The beautiful part about this is ISP-A gets to charge 2 times $T per megabit per second. He charges both customers for traffic. He charges the content guy for how much traffic he sends. He charges the access customer for how much traffic he syncs. So he gets paid on both sides. Does that make sense? So having both sides is really, really kind of cool. Now, if you look at the cost of this traffic, well, in the bottom case, the cost is essentially 0. The router is physically sitting there, and we're going to assume that there's no incremental resource costs on that router for handling the customer or this peer traffic. So on the bottom case, it's beautiful. I mean, you're getting 2 times $T per megabit per second. You're getting paid on both sides. If you have to go to another region, you do have a cost of the transport between these regions. So the revenue that you're going to get from this will be 2 times $T per megabit per second, perhaps minus the cost of transport. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's traffic type number 1. Traffic type number 2 is traffic that goes between one of your customers, if you're ISP-A, and one of your peers' customers. So in the case in this middle Kenyan ecosystem, that would be traffic that's going from your peer G going to the router and then down to a customer. Or perhaps way up there in London, that would be traffic going from B, which is a peer, down across the transport down to your customer 8. Now again, the beautiful thing about this is you're getting paid. You're getting paid $T per megabit per second. And what's your cost? It's either 0 or it's the lowercase t, the cost of the transport between these regions. So what's kind of cool here is, wow, peering is actually you're going to make some money. You'll make money from your customers. You won't make money from your peers. So you don't get 2 times $T per megabit per second, but for that traffic, you do get T per megabit per second. So you're going to make some money. And then the last category of traffic, third category, is traffic that doesn't fall into those 2 first buckets. It's not customer to customer, it's not customer to peer. So this is traffic that you have to haul to your transit provider and offload it to them. So the revenue, again, is $T per megabit per second, which is cool. The cost to you is perhaps the cost of transport to get up to your transit provider, and then the cost of international transit. Now, again, the good news here is, what's the cost of transit in Europe? $2 or $3 per megabit per second, which is a whole lot more attractive than down here where it might be $400 per megabit per second. So again, this comes up every one of these peering workshops. So how does the math work? Well, as long as the cost of transport is less than the local cost of transit minus the cost of transit up in Europe, this is not so bad. You could charge $200 per meg, and as long as it costs less than about that much money to get up to London, then this is a reasonable strategy. Does that make sense? So in summation, what's really interesting to me from a peering perspective is, when people say, I don't want to peer, I don't want to give away that which I charge for, I argue, well, this is provably not true. You actually are making money by peering, but from your customers who send traffic or receive traffic from that peer. So peering really does financially make sense. In fact, you're better off, most likely, to offload as much traffic as you can locally, as long as the cost of doing so is reasonable. And then again, the question that keeps on coming from folks that go to these workshops is, won't my customers prefer to peer? If my sales guy walks in and says, I'd like to sell you transit, we have a great product, we have a great international network, we can get you directly to London, and we can do all these things. And the customer says, well, I'm thinking maybe I'd rather peer with you. The sales guy gets a little confused and say, well, why should we give away peering? Fundamentally, though, the answer is that peering is a different service. It is a fundamentally different service. Peering only gives you access to the customer routes, okay? Only access to those customer routes. And what's also interesting about the African continent today is about 98% maybe of all internet content is coming from Europe. So there's not a whole lot of traffic within these countries yet that would justify peering. So you could say to the potential customer, yes, absolutely, we could peer with you. You're not going to get a whole lot of traffic today, but we would like to peer with you. And I argue that if you look at the value of an ISP's network, there are really just those three components. There are the customer routes. So if you sell to a customer, they get very, very fast access to your other customers. So you can compete on that. You get access to the peer routes as well, very fast in-country access to all those peer routes, which is a great differentiator. And then the global internet routes that you pick up in London. Now, those global routes you pick up in London, anybody can do that. It is very easy to go from South Africa and get up to London. You will not win competing in the marketplace because you can get up to London relatively inexpensively. But you can add incrementally more peers in your country and therefore increase the performance of your network because you get such low latency access to those customers. You can increase the value of your network by growing the number of customers because, again, the new customers get very, very low latency access to those customers. So, again, I argue that the smart way, as these ecosystems are spinning up, is to get more peers, get more customers, and don't try and compete based on decreasing dollars per megabit per second for global transit because you won't be able to differentiate yourself. You will if you're very well peered and you have a lot of customers. So anyway, that was my soapbox. Okay. So now let me share with you one other side of this. This is the ISP peering playbook. A lot of what I'll be talking about here is also in the book. So I'm going to skip over some of these tactics just for sake of time, and we can have conversations about that later. So what are we talking about here? I'm going to share with you guys the tricks of the trade. Over beers, over lunches, over dinners, I asked the peering coordinators, what happens when you ask for peering from an ISP and they say no? Or what happens when you request peering from an ISP and you get no response? They want to sell you transit, right? Right. Well, what I'm going to share with you are 20 tactics, actually not 20, tactics that the peering coordinators said have been used to get peering where you otherwise would not be able to get peering. These are the tricks of the trade from within this community. Now, to document these, I'm going to use a graphic notation similar to what I did for the international peering model. Here we have the ISPs that are part of the action. ISP A will always be shown as green. That is the guy who wants to get peering with ISP B, which is always going to be shown up as a blue cloud. Now, if the tactic requires a specific role within that particular ISP, like a peering coordinator role, I'll indicate that by a PC in the cloud. So here we have ISP A that has a peering coordinator that will talk to ISP B with a peering coordinator. The notation I'm going to use for peering relationships will be like this, where you see the colors indicating the route announcements back and forth. In some cases, I might just have a P and not talk about the announcements if that's not relevant. And in the case of transit, there'll be a T, again, with a $ on the side that gets paid. If this particular tactic that I'll talk about has to do with the customers of the ISP, I'll show those as colored clouds underneath the ISP network. And again, the T and the $ indicates who's getting paid. If the tactic involves internet transit, then again, we have a few different ways of showing the exact same thing. Some of these are shorthand just to make the discussion easier. In a couple cases, the traffic flow is the thing that's being manipulated. Again, these are all tactics that people have used to get peering where they otherwise would not be able to get peering. So I use directed lines, and the width of the lines will indicate the traffic volume. So you see up at the top, there might be a large amount of traffic being sent from ISP A to ISP B, and a small amount that comes back in return. Okay, so let's get to the tactics. The first tactic that people have used to obtain peering is what I call the extended direct approach. The direct approach is you would do what everyone says is the way you get peering. You send an email to peering@ispdomain.net, and the response comes back yay or nay, or there's no response. But the seasoned peering coordinators, they don't actually do that. Sometimes that will work, but very often it won't. The truth of the matter is, as much as peering coordinators say send email, the reality is there are about 10 ways that are far more effective. And they all involve the first bunch involve face-to-face. As it turns out, when I have a conversation here with a person over a drink, they will most likely respond to me and not walk away or ignore me. It's not always the case. But it turns out that face-to-face, I can ask you, so what are you guys looking for in your peers? Or what does your topology look like? Where do you want to peer? And we can have that conversation. If an email came in that showed such naivete, then maybe you wouldn't answer that question because obviously I haven't done my homework. But here we are over beers. We're just having a conversation, and the information can get exchanged in a very easy way face-to-face. That's just more difficult using an email. My role when I was at Equinix was co-founder and chief technical liaison, which meant that my job was to identify somebody who would most likely be interested in peering with somebody else. Since I knew these guys, I could do the introduction. So tactic number 4 in this sub-tactic 4 would be that you find the person from the exchange point that's attending this meeting, and you ask them, Job, do you know somebody here from Colt? And Job would say, yeah, actually that's, what's the guy's name? You probably know. Put you on the spot. Oh, you say that's Barry Thompson. And he's over there talking with Ren Provo or or whoever. So a person that knows everybody is actually really quite valuable and can be leveraged. So that there are a variety of things. I won't go through all these, but I'll share with you one other truth from the field. So why doesn't email work? Well, as it turns out, in many ISPs, network engineering teams, peering is not seen as all that sexy. In fact, some ISPs would consider peering to be secretarial or administrative. It's not true engineering. It's not deploying fiber and configuring a router and deploying next generation technology. It's not true engineering. So the problem is, peering requests are handled on a rotation. And it turns out that if you don't answer that peering request when you're on rotation, most likely the peering request will be resent next week. And it's not your problem anymore. So peering requests, as it turns out, via email are just too easy to ignore. So one solution that people said kind of works is you meet somebody at this peering forum and you find out that they're the peering contact for Telecom South Africa. And what you do is you don't send the email to peering@ispdomain.net. You have the business card. You send it directly to the person who you've interacted with. You remind them of the many fun beers that you've had, and you have them shepherd the process through. But fundamentally, the idea with the face-to-face is you maximize the face time. So what you do is you send your peering coordinator to as many of these conferences and peering forums as you possibly can to maximize the chance that you'll interact with the right people and pick up from the field what are the right things to say in order to get that peering. Okay, so what happens when that doesn't work? Well, it turns out that there's one type of person within an ISP network that will return your phone calls, and that's a salesperson. So the idea is you contact the salesperson and you say, you know what, I'd really like to buy transit from you. Can you give me a call back? Within 10 minutes, ding, the phone rings. And you can talk about, I'd like to buy transit, but I want to migrate to peering. Can you help make that happen? And what you do is you do this near the end of the quarter when everybody on the sales team is trying to hit quota and they're trying to make their numbers. And at that point, they can push just about anything through the pipeline. So the idea is internet transit with peering migration. So what often happens is the sales guy will say, okay, well, this is what I can do. I'll give you that transit contract, and after 1 year's time, if you meet the peering requirements, we will migrate that to a free peering relationship. So Williams actually did this with Sprint back in the day. And when Williams came back to Sprint and said, okay, we meet your requirements, Sprint said, oh, I didn't tell you the requirements are now a little bit higher. But if you'd like to rebuy transit for the next year, we can try this again. And Williams got so upset that they went to tactic number 3, the end run maneuver, which is where you want to get peering ultimately with ISPB, but they're not responding to you. So instead what you do is an end run. You go to ISPB's customers and you offer them cheap transit or you offer them free peering. So you decrease the need for getting peering with ISPB, and some would say it's like dating. If you want it less, you become more attractive. I don't. Okay, now I'm going to skip to one that came from James Rice from BBC Internet. This is called partial route internet transit. So what James said they would do is they would see that somebody was going to join the links. And at the time, the links had a membership fee. Do you guys know what the membership fee was? It was kind of hefty. It was like thousands of pounds or something. So what he would do is he would say, you know what, you could join the links. And that's ISPA. That would be BBC. Oh, no, that would be the customer that wants peering with ISPB over here. X would be the well-peered ISP at the links. And what he would say is, you know, BBC Internet's already at the links. And BBC Internet is well peered. They peer with just about everybody that matters. In fact, they peer with people that won't talk to you. So this is what BBC Internet will do. We will give you all of the routes that we learn at the links, including ISPB that you want. And we're just going to charge you for the transport to get in, plus a little margin. Now, when faced with the alternative of deploying at the links and paying a membership fee and having to negotiate all those peerings, this looks like a pretty good alternative. Now, mind you, this isn't real peering. There will be an AS between you and the ISPB of the target, but this came up as a strong tactic. Now I'm going to skip to a really fun one. Are you guys with me? I know it's late in the day, but pay attention to this one. This is called the traffic manipulation tactic. And this one leverages the fact that traffic is asymmetric, that small requests for web pages generates relatively larger responses back. So here ISP-A would like to peer with ISP-B. And let me walk you through this scenario, the layout here. So ISP-A is purchasing transit from ISP-L, and ISP-A is purchasing transit from ISP-M. B, the target, the guy that he wants to peer with, is purchasing transit from ISP-M, but peering with ISP-L. So as it stands initially, the small requests from the ISP-B customers, F on this diagram, the small requests traverses the path through L, which is a free peering path, down to ISP-A. ISP-A, being content heavy, will then send the relatively large responses back through ISP-L down across this peering link with B and then back to F. Are you with me? So the problem here is if ISP-A requests peering from ISP-B, ISP-B is most likely going to say, you know, I already hear your route through a free peering link. So I don't think peering makes any sense. It's already free for me to get that traffic. So what ISP-A does is he's smart. He recognizes this reality today and he anticipates ISP-B's response. So instead, he forces all of his traffic to go along a path that ISP-B has to pay for. You with me? In fact, some ISPs said they'll actually turn on a traffic generator and replay last month's traffic along that path to amplify the effect. So that when they call later on in a month and they say, hey, we ought to peer with you guys, the peering coordinator will look and say, oh my God, how did I not see this? We're spending a lot of money on this traffic. I'm going to save my company a lot of money. Yes, absolutely. Let's get this peering set up right now. So they get the peering set up. They'll leave the traffic generation running for a little bit of time. And after that, the peering will be in place. So I want to ask you guys, is this an unethical tactic? Who says yes? Raise your hand. Who says no? Interesting. The audience is about split. The people who say this is unethical, what's your reasoning? Do we have a microphone? Or? Well, we can start with you. You said you thought it wasn't unethical.
No, I don't. I think it's business. The simple fact is, let's face reality, right? Reality is that B is pulling content from you. Yes. They are not paying for that content. They are selling that content to their customers because that's why their customers are connected to them so that they can get the so that they can get the content. Therefore, they are profiting off the content on your network. Yet, they are not willing to help you out and peer with you. At that point, standard business rules apply. You do what you have to do. And the simple, sorry, no, in the peering game, honestly, the content generation, I mean, we talk about forcing traffic through paid paths here. Let's take it a step further. What about deliberately generating content on your network just to push up your outbound traffic to get peered to save on your inbound? Because there are a lot of ISPs who have loads and loads of free outbound bandwidth. Is that any different? You are deliberately putting content on your network to cost somebody else money so that they will peer with you. Is there any difference than that than forcing the traffic over the other path? I argue not at all.
Let me a counterpoint.
Look, I think traffic engineering is fine. So shifting the traffic is fine. Generating false traffic is not fine. And
So take away my comment about traffic generation. Forget I said that part.
oh, okay. Yeah. If it's really traffic engineering, that's acceptable. But falsifying or creating false traffic, that's not acceptable. Yeah.
Wait, so let's see. We'll take both sides. So, is there anyone that says this is unethical? Unethical. All right. State your case.
You're cheating.
They're cheating. Is there anyone else who wants to say unethical?
I'm going to be honest, been there, done that. But I did it the ethical way, which means I was sending my traffic toward L to B, and B denied that request. And just as an answer, say, okay, so I'm going to send it to M, check your net flow, come back to me. It took 1 week.
Let me ask you this. Okay, I completely agree that generation of false traffic, i.e. traffic that has no purpose whatsoever, that's unethical. And I would actually term that as a denial of service attack. You are generating false packets and sending them. No go. You do that and yeah, you get filtered, you don't get peered. But what about deliberately inflating real content on your network? Adding content, for example, when you know full well that the community is accessing X all over the place, putting it on your network and then speaking to the right people because it's all about communications and relationships, and having the official mirrors, etc., suddenly pointed at you, deliberately to inflate outbound traffic levels. I was trying to avoid that, but...
So what I find interesting is some people will just say this is just traffic engineering. The motivation is, yes, to inflict some pain, but ultimately that content was requested by that guy. The fact that it's going to cost him more money might provide a little leverage so he'll answer my peering requests. You know, it seems like there are arguments on both sides, which makes it kind of a fun. The other interesting one in Asia, one ISP that I talked to said what they'll do is they'll take content provider content, they'll look inside of it and rip out the ads and insert their own ads before passing it on to the customer so that they get the ad revenue traffic from that, which I thought was kind of a neat trick. Okay, along the lines on the ethical or unethical, another tactic that came up when I asked the peering guys, so how do you get peering where you otherwise would not get peering? Well, there are two forms of this bluff tactic that come up. The first is when you say, you know, we really ought to get that peering set up because I have a big customer coming online, Microsoft. I can't say who it is, Microsoft. But it's going to be all those all those updates, huge amounts of traffic. We should get that 10 gig interconnect in now and get that pairing set up now because it's going to be very painful and costly to you. Because that, and for some reason, I don't know why, when they bluff this way, it's always Microsoft. I don't understand why. I guess it's the Microsoft updates are just very, very large. But the other form of that is that, you know, Christian, we need to peer. I've got a customer that's getting terrible, terrible performance. Awful. Packet loss. I mean, here's a trace route that's showing the traffic is going to you, and I'm losing half of my traffic. 4% traffic, maybe it's 10% now. And the latency is, we ought to set this peering up, when in reality, this is all falsified information. This is bluffing performance issues in order to establish that performance, this performance benefit with that peer. And then the last one I'll share with you is a classic. I guess it's not the last one. It's one more. It's a classic. It's called the false knock outage. And the way it works is you leverage the fact that typically the new engineers that come into an ISP will work the midnight shift or the 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift. They're the least well-trained, and they're the ones who you are going to exploit. So what you do is you call them up and say, hello, my peering session is down again. And the NOC operator says, I don't see a peering session. That's right, you don't see it. It went down. You guys have done this 3 times now. Don't make me call Hans Werner Brown again and wake him up. I'm sick of this. And this NOC engineer, you know, he wants to prove himself. So most likely he's been modifying scripts and he'll think that he broke something. So he gets on and he configures the session. Sorry about that. I'll look into this and make sure this is fixed in the morning. And then the peering session stays. So what was interesting is talking to the engineering guys at a couple of large European ISPs, they said their NOC is now trained and they say, yeah, we got another 19 last night. So they actually refer to it by number. Another popular way, this answers the question, well, how does one get peering with a large tier 1 ISP? The most common way is that you set up a broader business relationship. So, Jaco, I want to peer with you. You say, well, you know, it doesn't really make sense. There's not enough traffic. Jaco, did I mention that we're doing a bid for fiber? And did I mention that we need some co-location too? Maybe we can tie these things together. So, as part of a broader business relationship, in some cases, peering is granted. And then to bring this to a local, again, with MWeb here, the idea a few years ago, and I can talk about this because this was published in some journals, that down here we have, or actually I guess up there is South Africa, okay? And ISP-A would like to peer with the incumbent. This would be Telecom South Africa. And as you know, MWeb is a big player, and they just put in place this all-you-can-eat internet service. The traffic was ramping up, and they're doing very well. But Telecom South Africa said, no, we don't want to peer. So Rudy, their CEO, said, we will not pay 1 cent to Telecom South Africa. If they don't want to peer with us, that's it. We're not going to pay you a single cent. So what they did is they cut off. This is an incredibly bold move, guys, to just turn off your transit connection with a tier 1 ISP. And they forced all that traffic to London. And in London, they peered as much away as they could for free. They bought transit from the upstream provider for Telecom South Africa. Again, a path that Telecom South Africa would have to pay for. So that traffic was not only poorly performing, but was also really expensive, especially with the all-you-can-eat model. And at least according to the trade rags that I looked at, peering was eventually granted. And this is one of those very, very rare cases where a tier 1 ISP buckled and actually agreed to peer with another non-tier 1 ISP. So anyway, I thought that was kind of an interesting one. I'm going to skip this except to say that this is a very common story in the peering coordinator community, that a tier 1 ISP will very often say, we're not restrictive, we're actually only selective. We will peer with ISPs of similar size and scope. And so people would say, okay, well, I am now of that similar size and scope. And then what they do is they raise the bar and say, oh, the new peering requirements are just slightly higher. Now we need you to be in 5 countries with a 10 gig backbone and so forth. So the consistent raising of the peering requests or peering requirements is a common story. In fact, it brings me to Tactic 26, which is from Comendico. I forgot his name now. But Telstra in Australia is the big bad tier 1 ISP. And Telstra, formerly state-owned, they are the 600-pound gorilla. And Comendico wanted to peer. So Telstra has this public peering policy that states you need to be all across the continent with a certain backbone. In fact, James Spenceley is his name. James said that the requirement was effectively about a gigabit per second for every man, woman, child, and kangaroo. So it was an extraordinarily high bar to meet. But Comendico did it just the same. They got fiber, they purchased all these routers, deployed them across the nation, across the country, and then they said, okay, Telstra, we're ready to talk about peering. And Telstra would say, oh, you need to send us a network map. They sent a network map. A couple months elapsed. Oh, you know, we have a new legal team, so can you resend us the network map and tell us what your interconnect requirements are? And they would just do step after step, schedule meetings, and then more meetings 3 or 4 months out, until eventually you have this long, circuitous path that ultimately led to 18 months, 2 years, 2.5 years, where Communico ran out of money. They went bankrupt. So James Spenceley calls this the mild approach, make it long and difficult. And this is really the last one. This is congest transit pipes. So the idea here is that you are a large cable company, and you want to sell paid peering. You don't want to peer openly with people. You want to sell paid peering. So what's the alternative to peering? Well, you could send the traffic through a transit provider that will eventually get to the cable company. But this tactic involves congesting. That is not upgrading the transit service. So what happens is you end up with a graph that looks like this, where the path between your content and the cable company eyeballs is going through an amazingly congested link. The performance is awful. Now, if you're a CDN and your job is to get that content topologically as close as possible to the eyeballs, and you go through a transit service that has 100% congestion, you're not going to be providing very good service to your customers, which forces content companies to buy paid peering. Now, some people say, well, that might be just an anomaly. Maybe they're going to upgrade the circuit. But this is the 30-day path where you can see every single day that transit service is congested to the point where it's almost unusable. And again, that forces people to buy paid peering. Anyway, with that, I'll take a stop and see if there are any questions or any discussions that folks want to have on anything we talked about. Have you guys seen these tactics?
I've actually got a question for you, which is more from the engineering side. Yes, coming to meetings, meeting someone face-to-face, sort out the peering, this works. It's a beautiful way to do it. 300 or 400 peers later, I can say it definitely works. My question is this. As ISPs are getting more bureaucratic by the day, and as the likes of ITIL are being preached, and as the change management is getting tougher and tougher and tougher, how does your peering coordinator deal with that bureaucracy where he can sit in a meeting and negotiate 10 peers, but his hands are tied because of his own internal change control processes in the company? How does he deal with that situation?
Does anyone here want to answer it? I can tell you that some of the issues that I see most common are with the larger ISPs, where they do in fact have a peering steering committee. And they assign a trouble ticket to every peering request for fear that the regulator might come back and say, show me how you treated all peering requests in a similar way, how you were non-discriminatory. So for those larger ISPs, they would say it's sort of a prophylactic measure to prevent the regulator from coming in and getting very interested in their peering processes. For the smaller guys, and I guess some of the medium-sized guys, you could actually come to a meeting like this, someone in the back of the room, you sit side by side and you actually configure peering sessions up. And that's the way it used to be in the golden days of yore, where in the back of Nanog meetings you see a lot of guys sitting around, and it's very convenient. If you've got 2 laptops and you can both see each other's screen and you can figure out what's going on when the peering's not set up, it's a wonderful thing. The last AfPIF meeting, you turned up 10 peers.
While the guy was sitting on the panel, talking and typing at the same time.
And again, to me, I think that reinforces the idea that face-to-face, these meetings are just incredibly important. Yeah.
Can the regulator force the other company that's not willing, that's not keen on peering to peer, get into a peering agreement?
That doesn't
Is it just
tend
left
to...
up to the market to, I don't know, the market to regulate itself, or can that be enforced by a regulator?
You don't tend to see that happen. Most of the regulation guys that I've spoken with, they take a bit of a hands-off approach, maybe because they don't understand how this internet interconnection stuff works. But maybe they do understand that whatever strong arm that they put on this industry has long, far-reaching implications. People plan their internet futures based upon the understanding that internet stuff is not all that much regulated.
Just to add on that, this is Michuki. We've seen some countries, especially here in Africa, that the governments have actually come up with policy saying that if you have to bid to provide connectivity to the government, then you must be peering at the local exchange. So that means if you want to bid or try and provide services to government, one of the requirements is that you must be peering at the local exchange with the local operators. So that has managed to work in a couple of countries, but I wouldn't say it's definitive that it will work in all. It is an incentive for them, because if you're a large operator, one of the biggest customers you want to provide connectivity to is government. Now, if you're not connected to the local exchange, it means you're automatically disqualified from providing that, and that's lucrative business. So you're sort of saying, well, I like to have your business, but you have to do something that I also would like to have, which is access, local access. Yeah. I've seen a hand on that far side and here. Okay.
Thank you, Eddie from BSc. One of the examples you showed us were in the tricks you had this one, where you had L and M.
Yeah.
And how do I know that the relationship between L and B is peering and between M and B is transit?
That's a really, really good question, because it's really hard to tell. One can see adjacencies. One doesn't see the money flow. So how do they do it? As a job, peering coordinators talk to each other. So everybody knows pretty much in each ecosystem who the large tier 1 ISPs are and who peers openly, who peers selectively, and when a peering goes forward that you wouldn't think would go forward, these folks will find out and understand why. So again, to me, that's another reason that these types of meetings are really important for collecting that peering intel.
And they covered by NDA, how do they come to know it? Is it too much beer?
There are two things that aren't worth the paper they're written on. One is NDAs, and the other are SLAs. The dirty little secret in the ISP industry is that SLAs are typically nothing more than an insurance policy, meaning that when an enterprise comes in and says, we demand, 5 nines of uptime and a particular latency, what the ISPs generally do is they calculate the likelihood of them not meeting that SLA, and they increase that price proportionately. So when they pay out, if they have to pay out, then it'll work out to be about the same price. Whatever SLA you want, I can do that. It doesn't mean the network's any better, but it does mean that they factor in the likelihood of paying out. And it works out really well for the ISPs, because if there is a problem, the customer has to notice, the customer has to have documentation, and there can be all kinds of delay and hassle before the ISP provides the credits or whatever it is, which, by the way, don't cover the reason that the SLA was put in place in the first place. So at least from the ISPs that I've spoken with, SLAs are generally not worth the paper they're written on, and the NDAs are violated all the time. Yeah.
Just a response to that previous question about regulators and regulatory intervention. It's all going to depend on how technology neutral your legislation is and how technology neutral your regulation, your interconnect regulation is, if you have appropriate interconnect regulation in your country. And I would like to suggest an additional tactic, because that's what we use in South Africa, which is you really don't want us to have to go to the regulator on this one. They don't have a clue what's going on here. Please don't make me go lodge a formal complaint, because then it's going to ruin it for the industry.
Thank you for bringing it up. You know, that comes up so much. The ISPs tell me just the threat of regulation is enough to cause coercion. There's one more here, and then I'll pass you the mic. Oh, okay, if you're ready, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Well, that was a comment. That's a bit of what happened in France. We had the incumbent that was actually peering with 5, 6 ISP, national ISP. And then came an hosting company saying, we want to peer with you. And they say, well, you don't meet the traffic ratio, and it's not one-to-one, so you cannot peer with us. And they say, well, you know, you have a peering policy that you gave to the regulator, but those guys don't mix the traffic level or the location level, but you still peer with them. Say, yes, but they are ISPs, it makes sense. The guys say, well, there's rules. So they went to the regulator and say, either you peer with us, or we go to the regulator and you have to de-peer them. And in the end, what happened, instead of having 5 or 6 ISP peering with the incumbent, now there's only 3, because the other guys lost their peering. So it's a game where anybody can lose.
I want to hit one point before we move off the regulator thing, because the other story that I found interesting was, again, in Australia, Telstra was the big, bad ISP, huge, monstrously big, and they wouldn't peer with anybody. Like every other tier 1 on the planet, Telstra would not peer with anybody. So the big tier 2 ISPs in the country, namely Optus, Connect.com, and AsiaMail, they pressured the regulator. They said, there's a problem here. Telstra won't peer with us. It's preventing the price of transit from dropping. It's really a significant problem. You need to pressure Telstra to peer with us. It took many years, but eventually Telstra buckled and went from being a single tier 1 ISP in Australia to becoming what was affectionately referred to as the Gang of 4. So Telstra peered with Optus and Connect.com and AsiaMail. Now, shortly after they were blessed and granted peering with Telstra, Optus was acquired by Singtel, the tier 1 Singaporean ISP. Connect.com was acquired by Telecom New Zealand, a New Zealand tier 1 ISP. And AsiaMail was acquired by Verizon, a US tier 1 ISP. So what the regulators wanted to do was open up the market and increase competition. But the unexpected consequence was they simply allowed foreign ISPs to come in and get free peering, essentially giving them free access to the entire continent. So I found that to be a rather interesting story about the concerns about regulatory influence. So I'm sorry.
I'm Haitham from Telecom Regulatory Authority of Egypt. Actually, we solve this problem from day 0 for any internet service provider to have license to become an internet service provider and have international bandwidths. It should be a member of Internet Exchange. So we state this in article in the license for any internet service provider. We put it.
I'm sorry, what are the requirements? You have to be licensed in that country?
Yeah, to have a license to become an internet service provider with international bandwidths, yep. You should be connected to Internet Exchange.
You should be, or you must be?
You must.
You must?
You must, yeah.
And do you have to peer with others?
You have to peer with Internet Exchange, and Internet Exchange will act as a root reflector between internet service providers.
See, there's some significant problems whenever you have the must-do sort of things, because people find a way of getting around must. In the Hong Kong Internet Exchange, they require that if you connect, you must peer with everybody. You peer with the route server, so you're supposed to announce all your routes. So instead, what the ISPs will do is they peer with the route server, but they only announce a small subset of the routes. there's always a way to get around any of these sort of regulatory concerns.
Actually, if that happened, other internet service provider report that internet service provider A doesn't advertise all subnets to internet exchange.
I'm sorry, I have just not seen regulatory agencies be effective in this internet space. Just haven't seen it yet. I'd like to.
It's first time you should.
Yeah.
I have to say, I actually, in one sense, really like what you've just suggested, that a requirement for a license says that you have a link into the IX. I don't like the idea of mandatory pairing with everybody. Basically, what you say is if you want a license, you appear at the IX and you're there, because that is step one. Once they're there and they're paying for the circuit to the IX, my God, they're going to want to get some good out of it. And it encourages peering, but it doesn't mandate that they have to connect with everybody. So it could act as a great encouragement if you go halfway. If you try and force people to peer, there are so many technical ways to make sure that the people that you're forced to peer with don't want to peer with you anymore because you don't want to peer with them, that honestly, it's impractical. I mean, yes, you can force someone to peer, but you can't force the guy not to put a 64 kilobit rate limit on the traffic coming from that peer. You cannot mandate peering, but you can force the guy at least to be at the IX, and that I actually like.
May I answer to him? Actually, to answer your question, for that sake, we make it free, and we peer all the costs to the connection between the internet service provider and the internet exchange.
Unfortunately, it doesn't matter. For some reason, at least the ISP culture that I've been working with these years, if the government is anywhere involved, they kind of back away. They're very concerned about that.
Doc, I'd like to take you back to your slide where you had London, Kenya, and South Africa. You don't necessarily need to bring up the slide, but the question is it very commonplace where a relationship is defined by two levels? One is I'll peer with you, but the second one is if you want global transit, I'll sell that to you. Is that commonplace?
It's rare. Do you mean both at the same time?
Yeah, so it's still A and B, you know, two ISPs, A and B, but maybe B is the dominant one with a much larger international network.
Yeah, so here's how it has played out from my conversations with the ISPs. If you have a transit relationship, then you're paying me on a per meter, dollars per megabit per second. And if we at the same time have a peering relationship, meaning you get free access to my customers and I get free access to your customers, I have the incentive to force traffic down the path for which you pay. And the accounting gets to be a bit tricky. So what some ISPs would do is they say, okay, well, the way I will do that is I'll have two ports. And I will measure one port for peering and another port for transit. But the gaming that can take place on both sides is, I mean, you can do it. Avi Friedman once said that if you showed me a metered service like that, I'll show you a money machine. Especially if there's, the other common discussion is, if we can peer and just do settlement based on the delta, I'll send you traffic, you send me traffic, and whoever sends more traffic pays the other guy. He says, oh, that's a money machine in the making. I can force a lot of traffic and just stop all traffic in one direction, and you just pay me every month. There's just a lot of manipulations that can go on in this system.
What we do see in South Africa is different price points set for local traffic and for traffic that has to cross an international link. There are a number of ISPs in the country, ourselves included, who've figured out how to bill that. Obviously, the customer has to trust you enough to trust that they are being billed correctly. But there are differentiated services. Mm-hmm. In our case, it's a single pipe, and we mark the traffic in different ways for the different sources. And the customer can review the marked traffic on their side. We provide them graphs on our side and differentially bill, and they get the benefits of stuff that's locally exchanged, locally peered, all of that stuff at a slightly discounted rate. compared to the international transit, which is typically more expensive.
Yeah, like I said, I do see that in the wild, and that's similar to the last tactic of the broader business relationship. I'll appear with you as part of a fiber and a colo deal and these other sort of things. You know, another interesting thing is I asked Broadwing, a large ISP telco in the US at the time, do you have a paid peering product? Maybe somebody would be willing to pay you for peering. And in the same way that you're describing, they said, no, because it would be too difficult for our sales guys to sell transit and paid peering and describe the difference and when you'd like each. And then similarly, we'd have to have some mechanism to do billing and accounting, which is a little bit hairy as well. So for that reason, they just simply have transit on one side that generates revenue and simple peering on the other.
Okay, we have a question in French. How many people have their headsets? Okay, well.
Is it for me? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm scared.
Ok, merci. Je suis Kadio de Côte d'Ivoire. Tout à l'heure, on a entendu parler de l'obligation des ISP à se connecter au point d'échange. Et que, bon, certaines personnes ont dit que ce n'était pas normal. Eh bien, nous, depuis 2009, on a essayé d'inciter les ISP à se connecter et à créer un point d'échange. Ça a marché pendant un an. Après, ils se sont dit que comme on a mis le point d'échange sur un fournisseur d'accès, alors il ne veut pas se connecter au point. Donc, les deux grands fournisseurs d'accès du pays se sont connectés et se sont retirés du point d'échange initial et se sont créés un peering privé. Finalement, le point d'échange qu'on avait créé a pratiquement disparu. Les autres ISP se sont retirés. Donc, on a essayé pendant un an de les motiver à venir au point, mais ils ne sont pas venus. Comme le point d'échange est un instrument critique pour l'Internet, le gouvernement a essayé de mettre en place, a essayé de trouver un local neutre pour tous les points, pour tous les ISP, afin de ramener tous les ISP au point et prendre une mesure d'incitation, peut-être pas d'incitation, mais d'obligation à tout ISP à venir au point s'il veut vraiment commercialiser dans le pays. Tout à l'heure, notre ami égyptien a énoncé pour lui. Vous avez dit que non, ce n'est pas bien. Mais à notre cas, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? Est-ce qu'on doit attendre à ce que ces petits ISP se motivent pour venir au point, ou bien on laisse les deux grands ISP faire leur peering privé et ne pas avoir un point d'échange dans le pays? Donc, c'est ma question.
Did you get that question?
Yeah, I think I got the general gist of it. You know, it had to do with ISPs that have left an exchange point and the government stepping in to say we really want to have a carrier-neutral facility to spin this peering system up. And in all the peering ecosystems around the world that I've studied, I've not seen government regulation or government pressure working in a positive direction. But what I have seen is when you can identify a provable value proposition, ISPs will generally do what's in their best interest. You can kind of count on them doing what's in their selfish best interest. So in order to build up the population at a carrier-neutral exchange point, you need to identify those attractive peers that are interested in peering with other people. And essentially, you get in bed as an exchange point operator, you get in bed with the ISPs that have the same mindset, that they want to build a peering ecosystem. And it's hard. This building an exchange point in the very beginning is really, really hard. I call it the startup hump, because getting the first ISP in the building when there's no one else to peer with, how do you do that? And again, you'll see in the book that I describe some of the tactics that some of the smart exchange point operators shared with me for how they do that. But it's really hard. And getting that second one in and that third one in, this is the really heavy lifting part. And the government is not really in a good position to do that. But the ISPs, acting in their own self-interest, if you find the right one, they can be the ones to help spin it up. The way that the Europeans tended to build exchange points, is they would find 4 or 5 ISPs that were all motivated to peer with each other, and they became the founding members of the exchange point. And then they were the ones who would advocate peering at that location. And they would be the ones who would help spin up the population until the point where the value of peering far exceeded the cost of peering. At that point, it was in the additional ISP's best interest to build in and peer. Generally speaking, I haven't seen the government being a productive force in that way, but I have seen a variety of tactics in the commercial sector where they had the right things happen by leveraging selfish best interests. Does that help?
No, I think this question is more into those small ISPs.
Hold on.
By the way, did you like my omelet joke? Yeah.
So I'm curiously interested on that note. And Bill, I heard you say the same thing a few times today, and I actually wanted to correct you. So the history of the exchange points in Europe was not that the IX existed and went out and found peers. The exchange points in Europe, well, you just said, sir, and I just want to correct this. The exchange points in Europe were created by the need of the original first internet operators in those countries to have a common way to exchange traffic.
I thought I said that.
No, you said that they went out and found the first founding members, and that's not what they did.
The founding ISPs got
Right,
together
but
and said we need an exchange point.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And that's great. But the important thing here is that they created mutual trust among each other, and that attracted this. And that is very different from what happened in Europe than what happened in many other places. And what is the hardest thing to do is to create that mutual trust between those competitors. And that's actually the hardest thing of starting the IXP, and I think that's actually coming back to his question, is that how do you build that trust? And you have to have that need and have the realization that although you are competitors, you will all stand to benefit from exchanging traffic. In the European history, the reason this happened was that the European operators had 2 common enemies. One was the incumbent and that owned all the half-loop circuits out of the country, and the other one was the big US telcos charging them for internet transit across the Atlantic. Right? And to fight those 2 common enemies that they had in the mid-90s, they established exchange points to stop giving money to those 2 enemies and instead save the money. And that's how they created the trust. And I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind.
I absolutely agree. Could I tag on to that, just tell you the other counter story? In Turkey, there used to be 3 large ISPs in Turkey, and all of the traffic between those 3 ISPs would go all the way to the US to be exchanged with the other Turkey ISP and brought across the ocean, and then again back across the ocean and back to go to that first, similar to the South African thing that Graham talked about. And the 3 Turkish ISPs said, this is ridiculous. We're spending a lot of money on this. Why don't we establish an exchange point here in Turkey? And they all 3 agreed. They compete with each other, but at the same time, it's in everyone's best interest to have a Turkish internet exchange. So one of the 3 ISPs said, I will volunteer to give co-location space, and I will put a switch in my co-location space. I'll give you free co-location space in my data center, and we'll do this exchange point. And they did. And all the traffic between those 3 ISPs in Turkey simply was exchanged within one of those ISPs' data center. Then the Turkish internet traffic grew because the latency was low, because the performance was good, the price was low. It grew exponentially. And then the Tier 1 ISP that had the exchange point in their data center called themselves the core of the Turkish internet. In all of their marketing literature, they would say, we have the core of the Turkish internet. Why connect to these other guys when the core of Turkish internet is here in my data center? Tours would come through to see the core of the internet in their data center. It became a significant marketing advantage to have that switch in there, which is one of the reasons why that model had problems and why the carrier-neutral model ended up being much more effective.
We have to stop.
Please.
Okay. we've run out of time, and we have one more session to go. But I like where this is going. And before we go for the coffee break, announcement. So I said we'll have lots of surprises for you. So I think you've all liked the presentations this morning so far, the discussions that have been in there. And at the Internet Society, we felt that it's really important that because we can't cover everything here, it's important for you to take something home with you that you can go on and read and refer to over the coming, by the time we get to the next AfPIF. And we hope that by the next AfPIF, we'll see a lot of changes and stuff happening in the region. So in that regard, the Internet Society is going to give each one of you the second edition of the Internet Peering Playbook. So you get this today. So on your way out for the coffee break, at the registration desk, you go and pick your copy of the book. And of course, courtesy of Bill Norton, who has been working with us since the first AfPIF. Another thing, earlier this year, the Internet Society also worked together with a couple of exchange points, that is a Kenya Internet Exchange Point and the Nigerian Internet Exchange Point. We did a study to try and measure and publish the impact of Internet exchange points in Africa. And that is where the last discussion has come out in terms of what's the impact, or what value do exchange points add, and literally part of today's discussion with respect to peering, where do you go and peer? Now, we've published the study. It's called an assessment of the impact of Internet exchange points, empirical study of Kenya and Nigeria. And you get to see exactly how operators in those two countries are actually saving revenues. We have this online, but you also get to go with a copy of the same book, which will be available at the same place you'll be collecting the peering playbook. So you get those two things today. All right, so we're not done. So I'll send you off for coffee. Get your book. Be back in the next 20 minutes, if possible, please, so that we have the final session of today before we go for the peering social. So 20 minutes, please. 20 minutes.